and so I watched it, but nothing. The guy gave no explanation for what he was even talking about. So how could even anybody answer such a stupid video?
Well, MackQuigley, I'm about to show you how to respond to a stupid video.
Is there such a thing as godless creation? Does this make any sense? Godless matter creation. There's two problems with the idea that godless matter creation could even exist. One is the fact that total matter and energy is fixed, and the other is entropy. Because these things disprove it right off the bat.
So you cite two laws of thermodynamics to try to disprove the Big Bang Theory, and you don't even give an explanation. You just show the biographies of the two men who discovered these laws, and then jump to the claim that these two laws somehow disprove the Big Bang Theory. I think you put it the right way.
The guy gave no explanation for what he was even talking about.
You got that right.
People used to believe that. People used to believe spontaneous generation. Back in the days of stupidity and ignorance and blindness.
Yes, people used to believe that crap. But as you so kindly pointed out, Reddy disproved it in 1688, almost 200 years before the theory of evolution was even produced. I don't know who you've been talking to, but I don't know anyone who believes in spontaneous generation.
The other one is Lamarckism. Use or lose. In other words, your environment affects the kind of offspring that's produced.
Lamarckism? Come on. If you even read the Wikipedia article on evolution, you'd know that nowhere does the theory of evolution suggest Lamarckism.
The other one is natural selection. That doesn't describe the diversity of life either. That just describes that you went from 100 species down to 50, down to 25, down to 10. That's destruction. That's reduction in the diversity, not an increase in diversity.
Well, I'm glad you finally managed to talk about something related to evolution. And of course, you managed to get it all wrong, but I'll get back to this one.
Now, mutations is the only thing that's offered as being a description of what's going to change the genes that are put forward. But the problem you have when you say, well, you're relying on your whole theory of diversity of life coming out of mutations, is that it goes against, number one, the law of genetics. And that was put forward first by Gregor Mendel, who described it over 100 years ago. Long time ago, he did all that, and guess what? That hasn't changed. You have recessive genes and dominant genes, and whatever you show forth as being a attribute came from your genes. There you go. You have recessive genes and dominant genes, and whatever you show forth as being a attribute came from your genes. There you go.
Let's get one thing straight first. Mutations happen to everyone during the reproductive process. During this process, DNA from both parents come together to create a new set of DNA. This process is rather random, and new genes can be produced not by adding new genetic information, but by changing the combination of amino acids and proteins. Now, if mutations actually did break the first law of genetics, then there wouldn't be people born with 6 fingers, nor would you see babies being born without skin or eyes, or many other problems, or advantages that the average human does not have. The second thing is your nonsensical rambling at the end of your display of yet another biography. Yes, attributes come from genes, more specifically the combinations of amino acids and proteins, which are put together in a somewhat random process, leaving room for mutations, and allowing for attributes that aren't commonly seen. Some of these attributes may be beneficial, and now natural selection steps in.
The other one is natural selection. That doesn't describe the diversity of life either. That just describes that you went from 100 species down to 50, down to 25, down to 10. That's destruction. That's reduction in the diversity, not an increase in diversity.
No, that's not how it goes. But now that we've covered genetics, it'll be easier to understand. Mutations occur during the reproductive process, like I've mentioned. These mutations happen in everyone, but the majority of them are neutral and have no negative or positive effects. However, there are positive and negative mutations happening within every generation of humans on the planet. These mutations are obviously not all the same either. So taking all of this into consideration, you can see that diversity can and will increase if multiple beneficial mutations are occurring at the same time. The mutations that give greater advantages will survive and reproduce, eventually to the point where their parents and ancestors can't compete anymore, but from them came more than one different mutation and eventually new species that survive. No, that's not what God of the Gaps is. If there was a serious lack of evidence, a scientific theory would be thrown out. An example of God of the Gaps statement is that since we don't know for sure how life began on Earth, God must have done, without showing evidence to prove it. The point of the statement is as science progresses, there are less and less gaps for God to fill. So saying God did it isn't much of an explanation for anything. Especially with the example given, it's only a matter of time before we figure out how certain things work.
Arguments from ignorance. The creationists are using arguments from ignorance. But the problem you have when you say, well, you're relying on your whole theory of diversity of life coming out of mutations, is that it goes against, number one, the law of genetics. Every time you point out that they're ignorant, that they don't know what they're talking about, that they have no explanation for various things, then what they do is you must resort to this. That's an argument from ignorance, and then just reject it out of hand. Defend your lies. We don't need to defend it. You prove that you're really an atheist. That's what I'd like to have you prove. And you can't do it, and so you know what? Stop wasting our time, and don't leave filthy comments on this video, because that's all we get from atheists is filthy comments, because you're filthy people and you need to repent and get right with the Lord, and otherwise you will end up in that hell that you so dislike. So don't do that. Get saved. That's the best advice I can give you, is to stop all this stupidity and get saved.